Colt Sebastian Taylor, and welcome to the Colt Sebastian Taylor Show, where each episode I talk about something that I find to be very interesting and, interesting. You may not, but for the 5 to 6 people who watch this, it's a risk I'm willing to take. Today, I'm talking about maps. I really like maps. I find them to be very interesting, especially weird border situations, little quirks that you don't see from very far up, but once you zoom in, you go, how did that happen? So today, there's thousands of weird situations all over the world, but there's 3 in the United States I always like to talk about when I'm talking about maps in casual conversation, as one does. We'll share with you today, and a little background on each of these. May help you win a bit of trivia one of these days, or maybe a free shot somewhere else. Unlikely, but you never know. The first thing is actually very close to where I live, in Delaware. Yes, Delaware, the first state, just next to New Jersey, Maryland, and, of course, Pennsylvania. Fun fact, Delaware, and before the Revolutionary War, Delaware and Pennsylvania actually shared the same governor. There was a governor of Delaware and a governor of Pennsylvania, same person. And so Pennsylvania and Delaware were kind of connected, politically speaking. Pennsylvania had its own legislature, and Delaware had its own folks to make the laws, but both organizations had to get signatures from the governor, which was the same person, for that to officially become law. Then, after the Revolutionary War, Delaware became its own official state with its own governor. Pennsylvania kept its governor. So, Delaware used to be known as the lower 3 counties of Pennsylvania, and Delaware, but it was still kind of part of Pennsylvania. Well, I think interesting about Delaware, as you can see here, it has a curved northern border, and that is an artificial curved border. There's no other state in the United States that has a curved border that is artificial. It's not following a river or a mountain or anything like that. That is an artificially curved border. It is a 12-mile radius from Newcastle, Delaware. When the area was being settled, Charles II gave the area north of Maryland to William Penn. And then Maryland had a little draw off to the side, but and that became part of Pennsylvania also, but not New Jersey because it was separated by a river. So sort of you get an idea of geography speaking. But the king felt that these area had to be separated from Pennsylvania, so he wanted the 12 miles around Newcastle to be sort of separate from Pennsylvania. So they put a little dot on Newcastle, and surveying at the time did a 12-mile circle around Newcastle, stopping at the river and also stopping at the Maryland border. So you get that. That's what you get there for the northern part of Delaware. Now, a sort of quirky thing about this is that, of course, it is an artificially curved border, but if you look closely there at the situation between Delaware and New Jersey, the way the original deed was written over hundreds and hundreds of years ago, way before the Revolutionary War, the claim that Delaware has is to the entire river at the low water mark. So in most situations, internationally and through state borders, the river, it's divided down the middle of the river, usually, the where ships are going, the channel, but it's generally divided down the middle for a river between states. But in this part of Delaware, in this 12-mile circle, New Jersey has no say. Nothing belongs to New Jersey. It's all Delaware at the low water mark. So Delaware extends over the entire river in this area. The further south you go, outside of that 12-mile circle, the border shifts back over. And this has been the source of some contention between New Jersey and Delaware, and they went to the Supreme Court in 1877, 1934, and 1935, and even 2007 about the border situation here, because New Jersey wanted to do some things on the river, but Delaware says, hey, that's a river, you can't do that, and we say no. In fact, Delaware symbolically threatened to call out the Delaware National Guard to defend their borders, whereas New Jersey said, hey, we got the battleship New Jersey up there, just saying. But nothing, obviously no one has been shooting at each other between New Jersey and Delaware, but it can be a little testy between the two states in this situation, but the Supreme Court has pretty much settled for good that that's the way the border is, and you guys are going to just have to work it out. Another interesting part of this border situation with the circle is something called something called the wedge. Let me pop that up there. Surveying in the 1600s, 1700s was pretty good, but not perfect. So there was a situation where the Maryland claim stopped, and as you can see there, the circle didn't quite touch the corner there. So there was this wedge of land that was claimed both by Pennsylvania and Delaware, about 684 acres worth, about a little bit over a square mile. And so on some maps, Pennsylvania had this little dip, this little rudder down that they claimed, and on other maps, Delaware claimed it. And the problem was people who lived there got tax bills from both states. So up until the late 1800s, early 1900s, not a ton of people lived there, and so the dispute sort of simmered, and finally they went to they settled the claim in 1921, giving that tiny bit of land over to Delaware because it just made more sense because you could access the area from Delaware, and at the time, for Pennsylvania, you would have to drive through Maryland or Delaware just to this tiny bit of land. And then as the smaller you get, it was impractical to give it to Pennsylvania. But that was a state border dispute between states. But that was finally solved. There's a lot of sort of odd border dispute situations between states that have never been really resolved. The people just kind of get the status quo. The river situation is one of the unique ones, but there's another river situation up along the Mississippi River where the border is not where the Mississippi River is, but where the Mississippi River was. So there are parts of the Mississippi River where the state is separated. There's a little bit of the state on this side and a little bit of the other state on this side of the Mississippi River because that's where the Mississippi River used to be. And apparently that's the way they like it. Not a whole lot of people live there. It's usually just marsh or farmland, but in terms of where you send your taxes to, it doesn't matter in that regards. All right, the next border weirdness that I find to be just fascinating is called Point Roberts. Point Roberts in the United States. It is one of two enclaves in the continental United States. That means you can't drive to Point Roberts. You would have to go through Canada to get there, but it's still on the continental United States. The other part is in Minnesota, but almost everyone knows about that. But this is like the lesser known one that I find to be interesting. So, some background. So, Point Roberts first. Point Roberts is part of Washington State. About 1,300 people live there. It's about 4 square miles, and it's kind of a border quirk that was overlooked by the United States and Canada/United Kingdom. So, going way back. Originally, this area was claimed by Russia and also Mexico/Spain. But eventually, the Americans and Canadians/British took over this area. And there was kind of a brouhaha about who's going to control this area. And this was in the early 1800s. After the War of 1812, both the United Kingdom and the United States agreed to jointly occupy this area for at least 10 years, and they can renew it every 10 years if they wanted to. So basically, both countries had authority in this area. Anyone could move through here as free passage, didn't have to worry about anything. They both technically administered and claimed this area. It's not a very usual international arrangement. There is only, I believe, 1 or 2 areas still around today that has multiple national organizations controlling a situation. They share it. Andorra is kind of similar to that. It's a tiny micro country between Spain and France. The president of Spain and the president of France and a bishop of Spain are both the heads of state of this country through a medieval sort of treaties that never got resolved. Anywho, in Oregon, I digress. In Oregon, both the United States and Great Britain administered Oregon territory. Well, this was fine until Oh, let's see, the 1840s. And part of Manifest Destiny, lots of people in the United States really wanted to take over all the way over to the West Coast, hence the American-Mexican War, and they wanted a whole good chunk of Canada. The phrase was 54-40 or fight, which was the latitude of where they wanted the northern part of the United States to start, the 54th latitude. Well, negotiations. They finally decide on the 49th parallel across the United States on the continental part of the continent. So they start at the 49th parallel, they go all the way across, and then once you hit the ocean, that's where it stops. So if you look at a map, Vancouver Island dips down before that, but the United States can see, like, okay, it's not practical for us to own half an island. You guys can keep Vancouver. This is the line. This is the far north as we'll go. And that's what they decided. Well, like I said, surveying in the 1840s and whatnot, good, not great. So once they came across all this, not really, no one lived out there, wasn't very settled land, all the way across the 49th parallel, they realized, oh, hey, this little part of land on Canada dips down, and this little part is technically the United States. When they brought this up to the Americans, they never really wrote back to them, and so it became part of the United States. Only accessible via boat from the United States, or you had to go to Canada, then come back down again. During the gold rush, it became a very popular place for Americans to land and then cross over the border to Canada for the gold rush purposes, because it wasn't really not as well patrolled as other parts of the border, so they kind of could sneak across. And then today, it's very popular with people who want to, very popular with people who live in Vancouver, will rent out P.O. boxes in this little strip of land. And then when they want to order stuff from the United States, have it shipped there domestically, because that's part of the United States. Then they just drive across the border, pick up the stuff, go through customs. Way easier, way cheaper than seeing things being shipped internationally. Also, probably, I think it's also a lot quicker. Also, during times when Canada has their currency is stronger than the United States, Canadians pop over the border, buy a bunch of booze and whatnot, and buy stuff there, and vice versa. When Canadian currency is weak, Americans will pop over yonder and check out what's on that end. Point Roberts is often called the best gated community in the United States because of the high security around there, because the only way in and out is through customs. So it's actually a very, very, very safe place to live. Also, unfortunately, even though it might be great to work there, there is no hospital, doctor, dentist, pharmacist, or veterinarian who live in Point Roberts. And if you need medical care, you need to exit Point Roberts and drive all the way around Canada, which could be a 45-minute drive, to go back into Washington, because American insurances do not pay Canadian doctors and vice versa. So to get medical care of any sort, you need to go around, and go to, not the mainland, but go to the rest of Washington State. Also, while there is an elementary school there, older students, middle school, high school students need to leave on a bus, enter Canada, come back through the United States border control to go to school, and vice versa when they come back later in the day. Now, there was some talk about having this land be taken over by Canada, but people live there, want to remain part of the United States, so that is probably going to stay as is for the time being. Now, the last part of this episode that I enjoy talking about is something called a line house. But before I get to there, I want to give you a little bit of background. So the U.S. and Canadian border is governed by the International Boundary Commission. It regulates the rules for the boundary between the two countries, and it was formed in about 1921, started in 1908, but it was created in 1908. Sorry, I got my dates mixed around there. And basically it says you have to keep a 3 meter, which is about almost 10 feet, cleared out on either side of the border to have it be cleared mode, so the border is distinct. If you look at Google Maps satellite view, you will see a little patch of cleared land in the middle of the forest. That is the Canadian border, and it's this commission's responsibility to make sure that is maintained, that the little border markers are not stolen, that they're maintained, there's upkeep, mowing the land, so that the border is absolutely, positively distinct. And that you cannot build anything on there unless you get permission from the commission. So in North Dakota / Manitoba, Canada, there is an International Peace Garden that opened in 1932, this sort of garden where you can enter and explore the area between these two countries, sort of a memorial to peace between the world wars, obviously. And to build that on the border, they need permission from both countries and this International Boundary Commission. However, this Boundary Commission started in 1908. But anything built before that, really you have to follow any rules. So in Stansted, Quebec, and Derby Line, Vermont, these are two towns right next to each other. The border goes right between them. There is the Haskell Free Library and Opera House that was built before the commission and was built specifically on the border. So this building would be sitting directly on the border. It is called the only library in the United States with no books, because all the books are on the Canadian side, and the only opera house in the United States with no stage, because the stage is also in Canada. It's a very interesting situation. In fact, see the pictures there. If you go into the building, they put a black line down the middle of these rooms that is the official border situation in this building. You could not do that today. They would not let you do that today, but this predates that, so that was allowed to stay. So technically, also this building has two addresses, one Canadian address, one American address. Inside, there are 20,000 books in French and English, and it's open 38 hours a week to the public, so it's a functioning building. You can enter, as an American citizen, you can enter in the American side, cross the border inside the building, and not have to go through customs. Previously, they had people check ID when you're leaving, but now they've arranged things that, like, if you leave on the Canadian side, as long as you immediately come back over, it's fine. But this has caused some issues. Basically, I think a few years ago, someone got caught trying to smuggle guns through a library. One person from the Canadian side, one from the United States side, and they caught them. And then more recently, refugees in Canada who cannot get documents to visit their family in the United States because they get denied entry will come here, and this is a place where they can both technically meet face-to-face without violating any sort of customs issues. As you see out here out front, they have potted planters across the road so cars can't easily go over and whatnot, but there's regular programs there all the time, and sometimes you're on the Canadian side, and sometimes you're on the United States side. And this building is recognized as a historic site between both countries. And this is not an uncommon thing in the northeastern part of the United States and Canada where they meet, because this area was settled before the borders were really sort of established. So there are situations where a border goes like right down the main street of what was formerly one town, one settlement, but now there's a Canadian part and the United States part, and previously you could probably pop back and forth, no one cared whatnot, but nowadays it's much harder to do that. You need to make special arrangements, probably always have your passport on you, and it's not easy to get from one part of the town to another part of the town. There's also one other situation, which I won't go into too much detail because it's not that big of a story, but in the most northern part of Maine, there's a gas station just over the border from Canada that is it's the northernmost gas station, and it's like the only gas station that has its prices in liters, because the only people who buy gas from that gas station are Canadians. So, my friends, those are some very interesting and kind of weird border situations in the United States. I find them to be very fascinating in terms of trivia. Probably won't get you a job anywhere, but could win you some trivia night somewhere. Someone like, I remember that Point Roberts, or the Haskell Free Library and Opera House. But there are these strange, weird border situations all over the world. You can really get sucked in and read about them. I often do because I just find them to be fascinating because I really like maps. And even if you poke around in your local area, even the sort of borders between townships and boroughs can be a little weird. There can be little enclaves and little islands of part of a borough that's cut off from the rest of everything else because things changed and no one ever really resolved them. So, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Colt Sebastian Taylor Show. Me talk about interesting things about maps. And until next time, have fun and have safe adventures. And thank you for watching my show here on my YouTube channel. Be sure to subscribe. Also to watch some of the other videos. I recently did a bunch of product demos. I haven't done them for a while, but like I said, a bunch to try out. There are lots of fun, lots of good stuff. And yeah, so until next time, friends, I'm Colt Sebastian Taylor, and I'll see you later.